Hey there, creatives. Thanks for listening to the Creative Psychotherapist podcast. I'm super grateful that you continue to tune in each week and listen. I'm very excited to deliver this next installment of the Voices from the Expressive Therapies Summit special series to you. Today, I'm going to be speaking with, you'll hear a conversation that I had with Richard Gold, who is the developer um, of and creator of what's called the Pongo Poetry Method. And he shares about his work creating this approach to writing poetry, particularly serving youth that have been incarcerated or are living in homeless shelters, um, and a variety of other settings, but primary focus on serving youth in detention. Um, and I just was really inspired by how he has developed the structure of facilitating poetry from people that don't even consider themselves to be writers or who haven't written before. Um, and in addition to that, he talks about the mission of the organization to continue to train people in this method, to bring it to other locations in the world, and in the United States as well. And so he's going to be teaching at the upcoming West Coast Summit, which will be held totally online. So it, it doesn't matter where you are in the world, you can attend via Zoom if you'd like. And you can check out the Expressive Therapy Summit website to learn about his workshop, which will be on the 25th of March, 2022. And that is www.expressivetherapysummit.com. There you'll click on the West Coast link and then you'll search in the program. If you want to look directly for him, there's actually a search bar in the program, and you can just put in Pongo, and I'm sure his session will come up. Or you can just click on the link in the show notes, which will take you directly to his workshop. But you can also check out all the other amazing people that are teaching at the event this year. So, without further ado, here's my conversation with Richard.
The Creative Psychotherapist is the official podcast of the Creative Clinicians Corner, a practice-building resource for creative psychotherapists. TCP Podcast is the cast for creative, expressive, and experiential-focused psychotherapists curious to learn how to design, build, and scale a thriving private practice. Your host, Raina Lombardi, interviews successful therapists about the tools and strategies they have used to develop creative-focused practices. They also talk about the products, services, and side hustles they have developed using their knowledge and creativity to enhance their therapy practices, make a greater impact in their communities, and diversify their income streams. Welcome. Now here's your host, Raina Lombardi.
Thanks for listening to the Creative Psychotherapist podcast. I'm your host, Raina Lombardi, and I'm very excited to welcome my next guest. His name is Richard Gold. He is the retired founder and executive director of the Pongo Poetry Project and creator of the Pongo Method. Pongo establishes writing programs within sites such as detention centers and homeless shelters and guides teens to process traumatic events while giving them a voice and showing them how to own their stories by connecting with others and themselves. His book, titled Writing with At-Risk Youth, the Pongo Teen Writing Method, is available on Amazon and on his website, www.pongoteenwriting.org, and we'll put the link to his book in the show notes. Welcome, Richard. Thanks so much for being here.
Thank you, Raina. It's a pleasure.
So, Let's talk about your kind of development as a poet yourself, and how it um, merged into creating the Pongo method that you've been using for a really long time.
Yeah, great. A great and interesting start. I wasn't expecting to talk about myself in that way, but yeah, but it is relevant, I think, because the um, the evolution of Pongo, there was a very natural, organic process to in developing Pongo and Pongo's evolution, and I'll talk about that. But it's true that what preceded it was that I was a poet, um, and poetry was serving something in me that I didn't understand,
Mm.
um, and I had far to go with my poetry. And so, in my personal journey, um, dealing with some very difficult experiences from my own childhood, um, Pongo, while I was serving others with Pongo in initially some unknown ways, I was really serving myself and Pongo. I said when I retired, I wrote a statement. It's on the website, a long statement about where we've come from and many things. But one of the things I've mentioned is that my experience of sitting with the youth in Pongo has helped me to be much closer to the person that I aspired to be.
Mm.
And, the work bearing the essential dynamic of the work is bearing witness to the kids, and then helping them by facilitating turning their own words into a poem and being present as non-judgmental witnesses. And we can talk more about how that all works. But what has happened is that these kids in detention centers and homeless shelters, they may be dealing with a variety of traumas, involvement in punitive systems and neglect societally now, but they came to where they are because of traumas that happened when they were, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 years old,
Sure.
where they were neglected, where they witnessed violence, where they were abused, and in ways that we may not always know. I mean, they have some, a lot of something that's come up a lot is kids that have psychotic parents, and they are hurt and they are neglected and they are confused. And but anyway, so that the kids, but what happens is that when we sit down, and what we do when we're using one of our methods of just taking dictation, we'll go like, is there anything on your mind today? The kid might go, I'm not sure. I'm kind of bored here. And so, how does that feel? What's going on and what isn't going on? Well, my mom was supposed to come visit me today and she didn't make it. I have a court date tomorrow. I'm really anxious about it. Say, okay, well, here's the beginning of your poem. My day. I'm kind of bored and confused because my mom didn't come visit me today and I have a court date tomorrow. How does that feel? And in that conversational approach, and we train people to it, people will write about feelings and consequences. Like a poem like this, where youth is writing about being in detention, it's like, how'd you end up in this current situation? I don't know. I just, they'll talk about things like, I just haven't been myself since my brother was murdered. I just don't know what my life is all about when I've gotten into trouble, and I just can't. I know I can do better, And by the time you've written all of this stuff down, the kid has expressed things that they never realized about themselves and their lives, how experience have influenced them. They have a poem at the end of it that they then share with peers and also with judges and teachers and
Mm.
lawyers and therapists. And the kids continue to write. So why don't I, I could talk a little bit about the origins of Pongo, and I could also talk about, we've had like 5 pilot study. I mean, we're very fortunate.
Mhm.
And we've had psychologists and psychiatrists from the University of Washington involved during my 25 years of leading the project, who helped us with pilot studies and program evaluations, which are really interesting. But that support what I'm saying. The kids are writing about core issues. They're writing about it in one poetry session. And the kids claim that they're continuing to write. They remember us fondly. There's like a real connection, even with kids who have every reason not to trust strangers.
I can
Straight,
believe that
yeah.
because the way you described it, you're taking in everything that they say, you're writing it down, you're giving such respectful attention to their story, and then you're reading it back to them in a way that I, I would imagine they feel deeply heard. And that's a powerful way of building connection with somebody, especially if they feel like people haven't been listening, which I think is a common theme for kids who have been in trouble a lot.
Well, I think you've hit several nails on their heads, man. I mean, like listening, like reading back is an important part of what we do. We share the kids' work in printed books and in readings. At the institutions, we'll have, a finale. We'll run a project during the school year. We'll work with a bunch of different kids, and then we'll have a finale where kids read their poetry and we celebrate with cake um, but in the process of actually creating the poem, reading back during the process is very much a part of it. And I always said it reminded me when my own daughter was very young, maybe 3 years old or something, that the thing that she most wanted to hear was the story. Tell me about when I was a baby, tell me the story of my life, tell me my own story and how grounding that is. And the kids have not only not been heard, and they haven't been heard in some important ways, because these kids are in juvenile detention and not only terribly traumatized, but they haven't had mental health, clinical help generally, or very limited, insufficient, if at all.
Sure.
I mean, the whole circumstances of the trauma is very much related to social injustice, and the fact that the kids are land in a justice system rather than in a mental health system early on is like an indication of how poorly we're serving certain populations. But what I was going to say there is that it's not just the matter of the kids being heard. There is a degree of inarticulateness that trauma imposes on us, because trauma by definition is overwhelming, so it's confusing. So it's so awful feeling that we're often, if we remember something, we're not in touch with our feelings. If we have feelings, we might be angry and not know why. We might not have memories. But they're also, for a lot of kids, if trauma has happened in the family, then the kid who bore the trauma may also bear responsibility for keeping secret. And secrets are another factor. Kids have not been in school sufficiently, so their self-expression hasn't been supported. So trauma also, there's such a, affects us in a way where we feel so badly about ourselves that trusting other people with their stories becomes really hard.
Mm-hmm.
But, when you write a poem and you become a poet and you have something to share and you're a creative artist, all of a sudden the story is, this is me. The kids are not, it's a different relationship from a clinical relationship,
Right.
which is very important. And I, trust therapy and recommend therapy myself, and I'm there. But it's a different kind of relationship where we are not interpreting to the kids. We're not seeking an insight to pour back to them. We're letting them reveal their own insight. And I mean, that's one of the things I feel I've learned from
It's
the
so
work,
powerful.
the degree to which people heal themselves. So,
Yeah.
but
Allowing
yeah.
them to develop their own insight um, is really powerful. And I think it's another layer of respect that you're showing them, that you're not the expert of their experience. They're the expert of their experience and their story and what they choose to reveal um, about themselves.
So I mean, that, what you just said, like, leads to several things. We have collected over 1,500 surveys since I've left a year and a half ago. It's maybe at 1,600 or more right now, but from youth, but consistent, the responses have been consistently at the same levels, where these kids, 40% had only written a little or not at all before working with us, but 98% enjoy writing poetry with us.
Mm.
And 81% say they feel better. And I think the statistic that means the most to me is that like 74% say they wrote about things they don't normally talk about.
That's amazing.
So there's that. But then there's also the thing that in all these years of doing the work, we've worked very closely from the very beginning with psychiatrists from the community psychiatrists from the University of Washington School of Medicine. That it's amazing, but those community psychiatrists are in the med school, but they're also attending psychiatrists at the state psych hospital for children. They're attending psychiatrists in the detention center. I mean, the link between therapists in these difficult, there's a link between therapists in these difficult settings and the medical school community psychiatrists. Well, I was fortunate enough to link up with those people too, and they've been advisors and supporters. So, I mean, so we know after all these years of doing the work that it's safe. That if since youth are only sharing what they need to share, and they are only sharing, we never say to the kids, this is good for you, you should do this, or we never judge them based on how much they reveal. We just say, what's in your mind? What would you like to talk about? Now we ask questions, but it's from the perspective of being, what I tell my volunteers is what we are fans of the kids as writers. That we, as a reader, I'm curious about how you felt when that happened, when your dad walked out. What did you think? Someone, but we always, but we would say literally, but you're the boss of this poem. That's just an idea. What would you like to say next? And another very interesting thing about facilitating creativity in these situations is that you can offer lots of creative options, and it just stimulates. People who work in creative environments know this. And if you're with a team, people can bounce ideas off of one another, and it stimulates you. And what you do is ultimately your own thing. I mean, this is what I worried about when I started doing this work as a person with no background clinical training as a poet. And I started doing this work, and then it was like, are these my words or are these the kids? The kids totally felt their words were their own. But what we would do is say, how'd you feel? And if this is, I'm comfortable sitting with a certain amount of silence, but if someone needs help, I say, well, I've worked with a lot of kids. Sometimes kids feel angry. Sometimes they feel numb. Sometimes they feel confused. You know, a kid might go, I don't know. I just felt like I'd just been flushed down the toilet. You know, I mean,
Mhm.
the as we are able to be open to feelings, and that's another great thing about poetry, because poetry honors feeling, and
Mhm.
um, and poetry is also very economical and accesses unconscious feeling.
Sure.
So so the kids will say something and go, okay, that's great. Let's, you know, what do you want to call your poem? Oh, let's title it Flush Down the Toilet, and there we go. And so you see there's the whole creative process that happens in the dialogue of listening, of sharing, of providing some structure and guidance in the relationship. And I
Mhm.
mean, that's another amazing thing. It's a relationship, because the kids love it. And we'll sit down with a kid and we might be a different race. I'm white. A lot of the kids in detention are black. We've worked over the years, recognized that we needed to give kids models of people who look like them.
Mhm.
But the mentors might be of a different race and might be of a different economic circumstances, whatever. But if you're sitting there listening to someone, ultimately, there's no better basis for a relationship than respect and caring. And
Yeah.
that's the ultimate. And you were alluding to this. That's the ultimate manifestation of respect and caring, is listening. So
Mhm. And that gives the person the opportunity to feel vulnerable and to allow what needs to flow, right? Like if we don't feel connected, it's hard to allow um, such uh, s- deep emotional stuff to come out in the presence of another person. And so it sounds like over the years, you really have honed um, the method and taught the people that carry this work on to make that a priority so that the kids that you're serving have that ability to express themselves. I think your statistic earlier in, mentioning that the 74% of the participants wrote about things that they wouldn't talk about really speaks to that skill of creating a space, a holding environment, if you will, where the kids feel like they can be themselves and share their truths. That's really powerful work that you're doing.
there, again, poetry. The model of poetry is that poetry can embodies strong emotion and embodies complexity. And a lot of the kids, from the circumstances I talked before, there's a lot of ambivalence there. We've had multiple kids. I mean, I think of maybe half a dozen experiences of writing poems with kids who were at a young age sold by their moms to the drug house because their mom was addicted. It's terrible. But their poems always include, "I love you, mom. I want you to be proud of me. I don't want to be like you, but I want you to be proud of me." And
Mhm.
that kind of complexity, our society doesn't always give space
No, it does
for that
not.
kind of complexity. And when you've heard a lot of stories, you have some understanding that it's there. And
Mhm.
another interesting thing is that so many of the kids haven't written before. And that, I mean, yes, if we create a safe space, people will talk about things that they need to talk about. Amazing, painful as it is, they just have to feel safe. I mean, again, it's a different paradigm, but it's a wonderful paradigm, a wonderful model for helping people, because
Mhm.
if you can help them feel safe, they'll talk about what they need to talk about.
Right.
And the advantages of the creative, um, doing it creatively, is there are a number of them, including the fact that you can access unconscious information. With a kid with a toilet, that kid would have. I made that up, but I mean
Mhm.
that's the kind of thing that happens. I feel flushed down the toilet. That metaphor um, is can bear so much truth
Mhm.
that it is extremely healing, but it's something that a kid would not come to without a creative context that's encouraging words and broader thinking and relationship through um, experience and feelings. So,
Mhm.
yeah, honoring feelings, honoring complexity. Again, poetry does that. And then the way we train our volunteers is that they listen. What we
Mhm.
do is we set up our volunteers in teams. So as teammates, they'll sit before and after working with kids, and they can process the trauma they hear with one another. And as we know, therapists are often drawn to the work from their own experiences. And so, listening to other people's trauma brings up your own unresolved stuff. But
That's right.
we have people work in teams to help them process it and to help them be strong in the work. So when they're just sitting with the kids, they're just listening.
Mhm. No, that was going to be my next question of how do you structure it when you go in? Is there one or two, or is there, a group that goes in and then works together in a group of kids, or are they working individually? How does that work?
Well, I will say that the methods that I developed, I mean, I've done a lot of group work, and they can be used with group work, but it's probably most satisfying and most directly brings up personal information when it's done one-on-one. And so at this point, what we normally do with a project is we'll have a team of often will be about 5 people with an experienced leader, and then volunteers of varying experience. Our volunteers, we have had psychiatrists and social workers and psychologists on the teams, but we've also had more often people don't have clinical skills. We have stay-at-home dads. We had an environmental planner who worked with us for years. We've had a lot of artists, a lot of writers and
Mm.
actors and dancers and musicians. Um, but anyway, so there'll be a team of 5. There'll be an experienced leader. They'll go into a site like detention center. They'll first meet as a group. Now, what we do, it's not a necess required, but they'll have their own poetry writing assignments week to week, which helps
Mm.
them process the experience and also helps them be better teachers. So they'll read poetry, they'll share their own poetry. Then they'll go into the detention community, they'll go into a classroom, they'll introduce Pongo, um, and they will find 5 kids to come. And what they will say was not, who wants to write poetry today? The first thing they'll say is, they'll read a couple poems that we publish the kids in books. The kids get free books
Mm.
when they work with us, so that we've given away over 16,000 of our chapbooks of teen writing to kids. And then we say, who hasn't written poetry before? And then we say, oh, come with us. And then we don't have 5, and then we'll fill out the team with returning people. But we've seen so much benefit from even one poetry experience that we try to expose as many different kids as possible to it. Um, and so the benefits of Pongo, let me just say, I mean, the average is less than two sessions per kid. So they're
Mm.
writing about this trauma often in one session. In some settings, there might be an ongoing group, But in a place like detention or the state psych hospital, we might have revolving people every week. That
Right.
way, there are no power struggles. People aren't obliged to come with all of the ambivalence that trauma can give on people. But anyway, so the team will come in, people will come in. If there's time, they'll do a little group writing and the mentors will share. They'll all write a couple line thing and or contribute to one poem that they share together. And then they'll split up around the room in one-on-one sessions with a mentor and a team. And they'll work in the way that I was sort of demonstrating earlier.
Mm-hmm.
And then they'll come back together and they'll share. And I would say probably more than half the time, the kid's preference is to have the mentor read their poem. But but a lot of times they'll read it themselves. And no one is forced to, of course. But often people will share, and often they'll have the mentor share. It's another part of this, like reading someone's life back to them.
Yeah.
And then the kids leave for the day, and then we'll have a wrap up. But the work itself has a lot of complexities. A certain number of them are mentioned in the book. We have we don't ask the kids to give up their ownership of their poem, but we get, at the time we work with them, we get their permission to publish it. In working with the youth in detention, we're in any institution, we have to deal with their rules in order to be accepted within that environment. There are always safety issues.
Of course.
Sometimes you go into detention and there's a lockdown, or there's been a violent incident. There are a lot of fights between kids in different gangs, things like that. And so some days we had to go in and just go home. And then in publishing, there are a lot of issues around publishing. We make a choice, even when we're not legally required to protect the kids' confidentiality. We make the choice to do that. Many kids would like to be identified, but I don't want kids talk about drug use or childhood filled with trauma to follow them into their job search when they're in their 20s.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So, we've made a lot of choices thoughtfully over the years. Now the website, there's a new website, and I don't think the writing opportunities are quite the same. I have to double check. But we on the website, kids who wrote there had the opportunity to fill out a survey, and we have like 26,000 surveys from the kids, and the results are similar to what I told you before. Like 65% said that they wrote about things that they don't normally talk about and stuff like that. And these are kids who are coming from all over the country and the world. So we have kids, the methodology has worked in a lot of different ways in different populations. We've focused on youth, but we've also worked with incarcerated adults and homeless adults and people who've worked with abused elders and some military veterans. And, there's some special populations where you don't, the level of trust is much higher if it's a fellow veteran, for example, who's doing it. So it's it's more complicated. So there's a lot that's complicated about the process, and a certain amount of that in the book. I talk about safety. I talk about structuring a project. I talk about self-care. I talk about a few techniques. So, but our mission, our passion, is to help other people do the work. So we continue to do it directly. Our core projects have been the detention center in the Washington State Psych Hospital. We've also worked in LGBTQ centers, homeless shelters, etc. But our passion is to teach it, and we give several trainings a year, and we're going to give a workshop upcoming at the Expressive Therapy Summit. And we have projects on our model. We call them Pongo inspired projects all over the country and in at least 12 other countries. So, there's a project in England that worked with kids that were potential dropouts, that a rap artist there did a great project. And, these people are following our model. They're publishing books or there was a project that an American couple went and did in the detention centers in Cape Town, South Africa. There was a project that a Japanese woman who was here in the US and interested. I trained her and she went back. She's a writer. She
Mhm.
started a project with adult male prisoners in Japan. And they required her to do certain types of, say, prose writing or focused writing, but she incorporated Pongo and poetry and personal writing as an introduction to get people connected and
Mhm.
understanding the potentials of writing. So, there's a lot of, anyway, our passion is to not only serve directly, but to do even more good by training and teaching. So
Yeah.
that's a big part of what we do now.
Expanding the reach of who can be benefited by the work. You've seen really positive results and have received positive feedback directly from the kids. So it makes sense to help others, right? And continue to have that domino effect and have it spread.
I mean,
Um,
some of that study, one study, I mean, again, we've done these pilot studies. We worked with a psychiatrist who's an expert on traumatic grief, and we worked with youth and adults in prisons, over 60% of whom have had someone close to them die violently, murder or suicide or accident. And they had a Soros-funded pilot study with pre and post testing on 5 different measures that included perseverative painful imagery and depression and attraction to drugs and alcohol. And there was statistically significant reduction in the levels of distress on all the measures. We worked with a psychologist who works with people with long histories of homelessness and alcohol use, and in a special reduced harm shelter. And they did pre and post testing on people's first poem writing experience. And there was a statistically significant reduction in the craving for alcohol after writing a poem.
that's pretty amazing.
Yeah, I mean, apparently that needle is very hard to move, and they were very excited by it.
Mhm.
And they're wonderful people who in their reduced term shelters are working very much with providing activities and services to people to create community. And interestingly, people who don't take to normal treatment and are allowed to continue their substance use when they're supported and provided arts, etc., given a shelter, there's less tension and less they are able to make some progress and drink less, for example. So, but anyway, so there are these kinds of outcomes from our work that suggest that. And a third study had a psychologist at the state psych hospital. We did a special session with maybe 15 kids, and she compared the kids' writing. She did a textual analysis of the writing and also compared the writing to the kids' diagnoses. And she, her conclusions and she concluded that the kids were in fact writing about the core issues, and that this model of poetry and good listening and having a partner, an adult outside partner who was just there as a caring person, that it enabled the kids then to make a better connection with the agency and with their therapy. Kids would bring,
Mhm.
of course, kids brought their poems into their therapy sessions and into their group therapy sessions and shared it with other kids. And we're having readings, and at the readings, psychiatrists and teachers and others are reading their poems too, along with the kids. And so it's like,
Mm.
our work in detention too, even in a difficult situation like detention that is mostly containment. It makes a difference, because when we're there and we're listening to the kids write poetry, I consider it hypocritical to not listen to everybody, if we
Sure.
didn't. So, people who work there talk, we would make friends there, and there would be people who would talk to us about their day and things that they were dealing with and give us support. And we had one guy who was a supervisor of detention, who was our biggest fan. And he was always there, always helping us. And I only found out later that as a kid, he had been gang involved, very difficult childhood, and he had been incarcerated in that very same institution.
Oh my
So,
gosh.
yeah, and he was now working there as a supervisor. And so, he had a special empathy for the situation, a special vulnerability himself, and a special connection with the value of Pongo writing. So,
Yeah, I think that there's something about the bringing a certain level of humanity to that setting, which can feel really cold and not very humane. Um, and to have that exchange of poetry, of the creative process from all the people that are within those confines kind of shifts some dynamics too, I would imagine. Um, Different points of empathy can be found from the people working with the youth, and the youth possibly hearing the poems of the people working with them. Um, but
it's very true that I can remember one time at the state psych hospital, I worked with a kid who he was a big 13-year-old, but he carried a teddy bear, and he was always writing about his teddy bear. But one day we sat down and he wrote a poem about just how deeply angry he was.
mhm,
And I shared it with a therapist, and the therapist was going, this is a made up name. Jimmy wrote that. He's about this tall. What? There are strengths that come through
mhm.
that even people who know the kids best within the institutions may never have seen before. And, the psychiatrist Viktor Frankl, Holocaust
Mhm.
survivor, and, part of his talking about finding meaning. He would talk about if you actually he learned this, I think, from Goethe, but the idea is if you relate to people about what they could be, they will rise to that level. And the youth who work with us are consistently expressing unseen levels of insight and healing and creativity and truth telling. So, this is another thing poetry does. It invites people to, be their best in a new way that the institution doesn't support. So in
Right.
our passion, I would just say that in our passion of teaching, it's absolutely clear to me. I did this work before the Pongo, 25 years of Pongo, so 30 years of experience. Arts programs should be in every detention center,
Mhm.
every homeless shelter, every psychiatric hospital. And in fact, if we wanted to do the most benefit to change society in terms of the incarcerated youth, if we filled that detention center, and I was ready to advocate for this, but that's one thing that there weren't enough people listening to me. But if we filled a detention center with art, with music, with arts, with writing, with dance,
Mhm.
these kids who are all victims of trauma, who are all um, stigmatized by their childhoods, and then again stigmatized later by a society that is, racially oppressive, they would become people who could express their feelings, people who would care about justice, and people who would be less likely to get in trouble in the future. This is what a detention center should be. It should be a healing environment, but
Hmm.
a particularly useful way of healing for people who are mistrustful, people who are as hurt as these kids are, is the arts. That should be
Yeah,
the total focus.
I agree with you. I definitely agree with you. I think the art has the ability to provide a transformative experience for all people. And I think the fact that you've been able to demonstrate empirically through the various collaborations in the studies that you've done on Pongo, which is not a clinical approach, it's an artistic, expressive approach, which is creating clinical results, statistically significant clinical results that helps people. That's pretty profound and a wonderful contribution to all the people that it's reached and served. So thank you for creating and sharing about how you've, been able to do this work over the years.
Very, very welcome.
So for people that would be interested in taking a training with you, you had mentioned earlier that you do within the organization a couple of trainings a year, but you're also going to be presenting at the upcoming Expressive Therapies Summit. What are you going to be teaching there if people would be interested in learning more about the Pongo poetry method?
So we have a session there on March 25th from 10 a.m. to 1 p.m. Pacific time. So if people can find the summit website, they can look up all of the summit is online. They were hoping to have a majority of it live, but
Yeah.
Omicron interfered. Our workshop is called Pongo Poetry, Taking Dictation to Facilitate Post-Traumatic Healing. So the process I've described today is the one we use principally, probably, certainly in 101 session, is taking dictation. We also have fill in the blank activities and some other improvisation stuff. So we do that, and then Pongo is giving workshops that now, because of COVID, are more available nationally and internationally, online trainings in our methodology, which will include background and talking about the research and talking about setting up a project at the end, but mostly practicing, hands-on practice, even though it's through Zoom.
Okay.
And
And
so
can
there's that too, available through the website. And then reiterating something that you mentioned is that my book, I wrote the book in 2014, but I already had 18 years in then. So it is a compilation of a lot of experience, the trauma context, how we talk to the kids. It gives lists of things we say. Our mantra is right from the heart about who you are as a person. That and things we say, we don't care about spelling and grammar. We just want to know what's in your heart, what you have to say. And so it's a very practical book, how to time a project with the kids and how we establish our projects where we have teams and hope for them to take care of themselves, etc. So there's that. And I would say that I don't know at what point you want to end, but if there's time, I could read a poem or two.
I would welcome
might
that.
ground it.
Yeah, let's read a poem, and I'll put the links to your session, your book, the website, where people can find out more about the trainings that you offer directly through your organization in the show notes, so that people can just click on the links and go right there. But please do read some poems for us.
I'm going to read a poem. This is a poem by a 13-year-old boy in juvenile detention. And just to say that the structure of it, I believe this was his first poem, the structure of it was improvised by the Pongo mentor, but then the model was so cool that we turned it into a fill-in-the-blank writing activity, which I can explain more later. But now his poem is the basis for people telling their own stories. So this is called How Tucked in the Corner. You see that I'm alone. You see that I steal, but you don't know me. You would know me if you knew how hard it was to live alone. You knew how love has hurt me. You knew your mom didn't love you. You see that I smoke. You see that I fight, but you don't know me. You would know me if you knew how I turn emotions to haze. You knew how I don't fear death. You knew how tucked in the corner was sadness. Dedicated to my mom. And I would just explain to people, you know, the books of poems, the poems are often dealing with a lot of sadness. I feel that that's the most important thing we can help the kids too. But their experience of writing, they might cry while they write a poem, then they'll go, wow, that was cool. I wrote that. Are you going to put it in a book? And part of our process when we're in a site is we have portable printers, and we'll type up when we're taking dictation, we'll type up on a computer and we'll print out and give the kids
their poem.
Multiple copies of their poem.
Oh, that's amazing.
Before they leave that day. Or if we don't do it that day and because of the institution, then we do it the next day. And then we also have copies that we leave with the institution, and we have copies ourselves where we staple. We're not going to keep digital files, but we have printed permission forms with their signatures. And so again, the complicated stuff, but we keep all that. So, let's see, do you want another poem? Or
Sure.
what would you like?
I'm not sure. Whatever you think would be helpful for the audience to hear, to kind of get an idea of the type of poetry that you help kids write.
Great. Well, one of the things that, again, an important thing that, for a lot of us sometimes is to, I won't say wallow, but just sit in our own, deal with our own sadness. We don't, it can be less useful for us to run away from difficult feelings than to immerse ourselves in them. But, if you have a supportive enough environment, you can do that. But then at the end of a poem, the choice that a mentor can make is to help a person find resilience or respond in a resilient way, But I have this strength, but I am different, but this is my experience, but I can be something else. So that's an option in facilitating the poem, and there's never any harm in helping a kid become resilient. So this is about a very painful experience, a 14-year-old girl in detention, but at the end she has, you see her resilience. Who am I? When I was born, I thought I'd be an innocent child, but now I'm here in juvenile, like my mother, out running the streets, smoking crack and robbing people for money. And I thought, who am I? I lost my virginity to a guy I didn't know, hanging out with older people who wanted to get in my pants, thinking I could get in the game. And I thought, who am I? It's harsh out there. All you do is sit waiting for crack, spending your money on crack, being a crack whore. And I thought, who am I? People running in and out, worrying about cops, being thrown in the back of a police car and thinking, who am I? And now I sit in my room thinking what to do with my life. Be like my mother or be like myself. I'm ending up like her, but I'm different. I can change my ways, and I'm not like anybody else. And I thought to myself, that is who I am.
That's a really intense poem. and
Very intense poem.
mhm, and a beautiful resolution to for her to be able to come to that conclusion that she has the power within herself to change and that she is unique and she can be herself.
Yeah, I think that for any of us, it's not necessarily a straight path from pain and dysfunction to healing and maximum function, but you know, writing can help us climb the steps.
Mm, yeah, I can see that.
Even if we slip back once in a while, and
Yeah, not a linear path.
you know,
Right. Wow. Well, I appreciate you being here with us today, Richard. And I will make sure that we have all the links so that people can learn more about your work, the Pongo method, access to the trainings, including the upcoming training at the Expressive Therapies Summit, and links to the books. Thank you so much for being
right.
here.
And just a couple of things, Raina, the pongoteenwriting.org will get people to the website, but the website, we focus more generally on the effect of the work, and we're called Pongo Poetry Project.org. And also my book, which was published by Rowman and Littlefield Education, is can be purchased through Amazon. Our website has our teen poetry books on it, and people can find poetry books there. But my book is available through Amazon or the publisher or other book sites.
Okay. I will make sure to um I looked them up and I saw that your book was on Amazon and I saw the actual books of poetry which are available for purchase on the website. So I'll make that distinction in
Great.
the show notes. And folks can check out the website www.pongopoetryproject.org.
Great.
Um, yeah. Well, thank you again.
Okay. Thank you for this opportunity. Pleasure talking with you.
You as well. Thanks so much for listening to this episode of the Voices from the Expressive Therapy Summit special series. I'm truly grateful for your continued listenership, and I hope you enjoyed this conversation that I had with Richard. Just there's so much depth and care and compassion in the way he talks about the work. And I found it really incredible that he has been able to collaborate with a variety of psychologists and psychiatrists to produce empirical research studies that demonstrate clinical effectiveness of a non-clinical approach. And it really speaks to the power of the arts as a healing modality, that it is inherently healing for people to be able to express themselves and their story and give voice to the unspeakable and have it heard and witnessed by others without judgment. And there was a quote at the end of our conversation where he shared that kind of the mission and how they help facilitate is to encourage people to write from the heart about who they are as a person. And I just think that is a beautiful gift to the world that he and the volunteers and mentors of the organization are giving to all of the kids that they serve and help give voice to their experience. So I hope that you appreciated um, listening to the conversation. And if you're interested in learning more about the method and approach, you can always check out the session that he'll be teaching at the upcoming Expressive Therapy Summit, Pongo Poetry, Taking Dictation to Facilitate Post-Traumatic Healing. And he talked quite a bit about that in the podcast today. And you can click on the link in the show notes for that. And otherwise, you can check out more of his work, his organization's work at the pongopoetryproject.org as well. All right, everybody, take care, and I'll talk with you next week.
Thanks for listening to this episode of The Creative Psychotherapist. If you like what you heard, please rate, review, and subscribe wherever you listen to your favorite podcasts. For show notes, downloads, and additional resources, head over to the website at www.creativeclinicianscorner.com.